Well, welcome to Lent, everybody. Thank you for coming today for Bible study. So we'll be done a little early today just because I want to make sure we got everything set for the service for today. So, as we look at the text for today, what sort of strikes you if you've read the text prior to this to study? What are some of the things that strike you?
I was wondering, how many times now has he told the disciples what was going to happen?
3 times.
3 times?
That's the total amount? It seems
Yes.
like there's more.
No?
It seems like every text that we read, there was something in there about
No,
it.
just 3 times. So
So
this
the
is the
third time.
the third official passion notice.
Okay.
And
That's
so
what I was curious
and it's
about.
just changed over a period of time as well too, from where we started with the first time he did it, the second time he did it, and now the third time. There's been a change over all that. So, all right, so we're going to be in Mark chapter 10, 32 to 52. Today you're going to see the second healing of the blind man, or the blind person. I think they're both were men. And so that's another thing to keep in note as we read the text. There's a reason why there's only 2 miracles with Jesus, healing the blind. And they also come at a time when I think he's really saying something to the disciples. And so I think you should keep that in mind too. Again, when they're writing this text, it's for a reason. Mark is very, as we've noticed throughout the whole thing of Mark chooses his words wisely. Mark is not, superfluous? How do you say it? Superfluous. There we go. He does not add detail that he doesn't want to, that doesn't have a meaning. If there's something in the text, there's a purpose behind every single word in the Gospel of Mark. I'd say that in most of the books, but especially in Mark because it's so short. So just keep that in mind. So
My question is, where's Peter? He's usually in on all these stories like.
Well, I think
James
Mark,
and John. I want to be on the left. I want to be in the right.
I-
Where's Peter? He's usually right in the midst of everything.
Well, I think Mark wants to spread around the stupidity of the disciples to all of them. He wants to make sure that they all get dinged a little bit. So, because it just wasn't Peter being the doorknob about stuff. I think the rest of the disciples too are, he wants to make sure, hey, it's not just Peter.
Everybody gets
They're
their
all
time.
don't know what they're talking about. So yeah.
Chapter 28, or verse 28.
So all right, so we'll start with so we're 32 to 52. So why don't we do 32 to 42? Who wants to read that?
I can do that.
Okay.
Jesus predicts his death the 3rd time. They were now on the way up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them. The disciples were filled with awe, and the people followed behind were overwhelmed with fear. Taking the 12 disciples aside, Jesus once more began to describe everything that was about to happen to him. "Listen," he said, "we're going up to Jerusalem, where the Son of Man will be betrayed to the leading priests and the teachers of the religious law. They will sentence him to die and hand him over to the Romans. They will mock him, spit on him, flog him with a whip, and kill him. But after 3 days he will rise again." Then James and John, the son of Zebedee, came over and spoke to him. "Teacher," they said, "we want you to do us a favor." "What is that?" he asked. They replied, "When you sit on your glorious throne, we want to sit in place of honor next to you, one on your right and the other on your left." But Jesus said to them, "You don't know what you are asking. Are you able to drink from the bitter cup of suffering I am about to drink? Are you able to be baptized with the baptism of suffering I must be baptized with?" "Oh, yes," they replied, "we are able." Then Jesus told them, "You will indeed drink from my bitter cup and be baptized with my baptism of suffering. But I have no right to say who will sit on my right or my left. God has prepared those places for the ones he has chosen. When the 10 other disciples heard that James and John had asked, they were indignant. So Jesus called them together and said, "You know that the ruler in this world, Lord, is over their people, and officers flaunt their authority over those under them."
And 43 to 52.
But it is not this way among you, but whoever wishes to become great among you shall be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you shall be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. Then they came to Jericho, and as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a large crowd, a blind beggar named Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the road. When he heard that it was Jesus the Nazarene, he began to cry out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many were sternly telling him to be quiet, but he kept crying out all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And Jesus stopped and said, "Call him here." So they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take courage, stand up, he's calling for you." Throwing aside his cloak, he jumped up and came to Jesus. And answering him, Jesus said, "What do you want me to do for you?" And the blind man said to him, "Rabboni, I want to regain my sight." And Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has made you well." Immediately he regained his sight and began following him on the road.
Okay. So, like I said, we are on the road to Jerusalem now. So this is when Lent begins. So Lent is that road for Jesus to walk towards Jerusalem, and that's our walk with Jesus as we start walking with him. So there's a lot of different things about this particular text. Is what do people have questions about in particular? Anything that you want to talk about first, either that or we'll start working our way through the text.
My question is, the disciples always question about the what do the parables mean and this, that, and the other thing.
Yep.
But he tells them this, and they don't have one question. They don't talk about it.
Yeah, it's pretty funny
They
that
just
he tells them this big, it's just like this dramatic. If you think of a movie, it's like this dramatic moment. Jesus says, this is what's going to happen to me. You have the music that builds up to it. It just feels like this really dramatic moment, and the next thing, James. Then James and John. Next thing is
they just change the subject.
Yeah. Hey, Jesus, that was really cool. However, what was really important for us is if you figure out who gets to sit your right and your left hand.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, it's very much a shift in tonality.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
And it's just like, if you would tell all of us, "Hey, on my sabbatical, I'm going to travel to the moon." And we go, "Okay," and we talk about something else.
Yeah, so what are we having for community supper next month? I mean, it's sort of like that. You have this level of gravitas that Jesus talks about, this important event that's going to be happening, and the disciples are like, "Okay, yeah, you've been talking about that, but that's not really what's important. What's important really is us saying who's going to be on your right and your left hand." So,
Mark always just gets right to the point too. You
Right.
probably just skipped that part and said, "Well, you heard about it before in the other Gospels. I'm just going into this right now."
Mark would be first, though.
Mark would be first?
There wouldn't be any other Gospels.
He's first.
He's first. That's the timeline that most scholars, not everybody agrees, but what they think is that Mark was written first, and then Luke and Matthew were written around the same time with Mark pulled up, so that they were using some stuff from Mark, because they're like, I think a lot of people see the reaction to Mark's text and go like, well, but they didn't add the story about this, or I don't remember it exactly the same way Mark did, so I'm going to put that in. So that's why Matthew, Mark, and Luke are very similar, but there are significant differences. Like even with the story of James and John, in I think it's Luke, they don't come to Jesus and say this. It's their mom. Their mom comes to Jesus and says, "Hey, I got 2 great boys here. I'm so proud of my boys.
Oh,
So aren't they going to be in your right and your left hand?" And Jesus is like, "Really? Why are we having this conversation?" Okay. So I'm glad we're going there. But yeah, I mean, so in Luke, James and John don't say this. It's their mother. And so you have different details like that are different within the difference between the synoptic or where Jesus walks to. I know sometimes in one of the different gospels you had Jesus sort of like going from here to there, like a big wide loop, and in another gospel he goes straight there. I mean, so there are differences between each of the different gospels. And Mark is traditionally said to be written first. But Paul's writings were done before Mark's writings.
There's the difference in Matthew with 2 blind men, and Mark and Luke just have the one.
Yep. So there's differences between all, and even just the resurrection story, you know, just the way that they all are reported, so are different. So.
Well, I had a thought on Karen's question on why they switched right away. This is the 3rd time that Jesus tells them what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if the 3rd time wasn't the charm, and they finally, okay, we finally get it, Jesus, you're gonna die, you're gonna go to your glory. So since you're going there, let James and I sit at your right hand and your left hand.
Yeah. So it could be that too, as well too. Yeah. Yep. We get it, Jesus. You finally convinced us. So because you're going to do that, we want. You know, it's sort of like what do we want out of this? You know, we want to be at your right and left hand. We want that. So.
Yeah, the disciples kind of threw each other under the bus, didn't they? Kind of.
Well, and so in
It was,
Mark, yeah,
like a pecking order. You know, like, can I be at the head of the class, or is it my turn? Or
well, yeah, but that's pretty typical. I mean, when you have any type of organization or group, you have sort of a hierarchy that gets set up. I mean, in any human society, you have a set of hierarchy, and so I would say I'd argue that disciples are no different. There's a set of hierarchy within that, because that's what we do as people. I'm better than her, or he's better than me, and I'll at least, you know.
Ask Hope Circle about hand 10.
Yeah.
about what?
Hen 10. In the pecking order, we as Christians should strive to be hen 10 and not hen number 1. It came from a devotion that we had a couple
hen
years
10?
ago, and
Yes.
we have just
Hen
not let
10.
it go. It's become a
become
very
our model.
That's
central.
on your shirt.
It has special meaning for us.
So yeah, so I think that's yeah, definitely. How do you be that hen 10? But I think with society right now is still the same way. How do we have power over people? Who are we? You know, that has not changed.
They want to be seen.
Right. Yeah. Or I think just go to a fancy restaurant, you know, or yeah, just what sometimes people demand for customer service. You know, they go to a fast food restaurant, they want you to be treated like they're going to the Ritz as opposed to going to McDonald's. It's like, I'm buying a $5 value meal. I'm not, you know, that's what you're buying. You're not buying caviar and lobster and, you know, this fry is burnt. Okay. You want a new fry? Take it out, throw it away, don't eat it, you know. But I think we've gotten to this point, especially with social media right now, with influencers, you know, my opinion's better than anybody else's opinion. And so, so that's sort of what Jesus is redirecting them again. Okay, so he's like, and it's really funny the way that Jesus says, he's like, you do know what's going to happen, right? So I've said it 3 times. What's going to happen next is not going to be fun. You know, there's going to be a lot of bad things that happen. It's going to be painful. It's going to be hurtful. It's going to be tough and difficult. Do you guys really think we can do that? And before he even gets that statement out of the mouth, they're like, oh yeah, we're good. We can do this, Jesus. And he's like, you guys didn't listen to a single word I just got done saying. Oh no, we're good. We can do exactly what you want. And Jesus is like, really? No. He's like, okay. He said, fine. You can do it. He said, but at the end of the day, God gets to pick who's going to be on my right and who's going to be on my left. Now, there is tradition within the church. Some people say that. So I think it's at this particular point, what did happen to James and John? So I should probably start with that. So tradition has it that James was not crucified. James was beheaded. And then John didn't die, but he lived to a ripe old age. So, but there's Christian persecution, so how do you lay all that? So they didn't exactly follow along to what Jesus happened to Jesus. Now, the other interesting thing, too, is people have often looked at this text and went, well, who was on Jesus' right hand and left hand when Jesus was crucified? It was two robbers. And so that might have been to an allusion that Jesus was making to them, that there was going to be two other people that God was going to pick, and those people were those two robbers that were on either side of him. That's tradition. That sometimes people are to say, some people just tell me that's a bunch of hooey. That's, but there's that observation you could make that, in some sense, the two people that were at Jesus' right hand and left hand were robbers. So, which would make sense in the kingdom of God too, if you think of it from a power dynamic. If Jesus is talking about how the least of us, the servant of all, that would include people like prisoners and people like that. So, and so then why do you think the 10 got mad at James and John? Why do you think they got mad?
Because they really wanted to be 1 and 2 also.
There you go. It wasn't
Got
they
a
were
step ahead of them.
Yeah,
and
they got
it's
a step
like,
ahead of them.
exactly. So yeah, that's the reason they got mad. It wasn't because the James and John wanted anything different. All of them wanted that. I want to be on the right hand, left hand. It's all about power. It's all about power.
Some things don't ever change.
Yeah, some things
That's right.
never
Yeah.
Some
change,
things
right?
don't ever change.
No, they don't. And I think that's the
Human nature.
yeah, it's human nature, and it's something that as we look at Christianity too. Christianity fights against a lot of things that are sort of inherent in human nature, and that's one of them. Is how do you be, and Jesus will say this later on. How do you be a sort of servant of all? And he tries to get that home to them. Whoever wishes to become great among you must be a servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. Again, it's a very different model of leadership. And the church has not done this very well. I will throw that out with our leadership within any denomination, especially our Catholic brothers and sisters. You have a pope. It's a very top-down system within the Catholic Church. The Lutheran Church, in some sense, it's a little better. I would argue, I have my own personal beef with the hierarchy within the ELCA, but that's just me. But I don't think the church really models this very well. I think individual churches model this very well. I don't think the hierarchy within most mainline denominations model this well, though, because they are always sort of a central leader. And are those leaders good servants to all people? And so and it's hard. If you have a servant leader, you're going to act differently than if you're a traditional leader within in a situation. Because as a traditional leader, you can, it's not very hard to fire somebody to say, okay, you're not doing your job correctly, you just need to go. If you're a servant leader, you're more into like, okay, so what's going on? Let's talk about it, sort of work through it. It takes a lot more. So this type of power dynamic requires more out of a person, because you're trying to understand somebody, you're trying to work with them, you're trying to be patient with them. And in our modern world today, how does that work?
Not real well. Not real well.
Exactly.
It just reminds me of that television show a while ago. You're fired.
Yeah.
Oh,
And that's what we love. We if you look at let's take The Apprentice.
Apprentice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're fired.
You're
We like the drama of that. Suddenly someone goes from zero to being out the door, but it's a lot easier to do that. It's a lot. So when Jesus is talking about the servant leadership, again, it gets back to one of the core things of who Jesus is, which is relationships. If you're a servant leader, you have to have relationships with people. You have to know the people that are under you. What's going on in their life? How do you walk with them? And all those things you're doing on top of what you're normally doing as a leader. So you're doing all the other decision making as a leader. And so servant leadership is one of the toughest leaderships that there is, because you are doing more than a traditional leader.
It takes time and energy.
It takes time and energy. And time and energy you don't want to do. There's going to be certain things that you do not want to do that would be a lot easier to just fire somebody over and just say, okay, you're done, or just break that relationship with them, as opposed to saying, okay, let's talk about it, let's figure it out, and maybe at the end of the day they need to get fired, or they need to move on to the next position. But there's a way to do that that is more personable, more relationship wise. So I think that's the thing that Jesus is getting at. But what if our jobs were more like that? I mean, what if you were working at
A
the
lot
hospital?
of people feel like they're easily replaceable.
Yeah. I
The
mean,
what?
Easily replaceable.
Yes.
so, well, I remember working at the hospital that there was we were getting this new work system in, and I was like, well, I told, we had one of the higher ups come in and talk about, you know, what their expectations was, and I said, well, I just hope I do it well, and you know, it's I said it was a little, I still getting understanding of what it is, and like I said, I'll have a lot of questions. She says, yeah, well, you'll do it well, or else we'll just fire you.
Oh.
Wow.
And I said, what? And she says, yeah, you will be replaced. I said,
Yeah. See.
I said, all right. I said, so when my exit interview, I asked for an exit interview with the president of Woodwinds at the time, and I went through and I said, one of the reasons that I'm leaving, besides being a pastor, I said, one of the things you should know about your upper level management is this is what I was having this conversation, I came in and this is what she said. Oh, she would never say such a thing. And I said, oh no. I said there's no reason for me to lie coming up here.
Yeah, you have nothing to lose.
I got
You're
nothing
leaving.
to lose.
Great.
I'm leaving.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to tell you what your front line.
But he's defending his management.
Right.
Sure.
And it was always, and I should say, once we had, once Health East sort of went to having all three hospitals really merged well together, you had that too. People were there was no servant leadership. And so it was a lot different, you know, back in the day when we just had, each hospital had their own administration and stuff like that. Like I knew, so in comparison, so the president we had at Woodwinds when we first opened, her name was Julie Schmidt. She was a intensive care nurse. That was her background, and she was the president. She knew everybody's name. She would go through the line with you for lunch and ask you how your kids were doing. And she wouldn't go back to her office to eat. She would sit with different staff in the cafeteria and talk to you. That's a whole different level of leadership. And the guy who came after her did the same thing too, until we, like I said, had the big merger with all three of the different hospitals, and then that never happened. You never saw management. The only time you saw management was when they came in and were screaming at you because you weren't doing your job the way they wanted you to do.
But it's not just at the hospitals. It's at Anderson's.
Yeah.
It's at
the same thing.
it's at UPS.
Yeah.
It's at,
Yeah. Well, yes. I heard the stories last night.
It's at school districts.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's
I mean,
everywhere.
I think we've all worked with or under or for people like that.
Yeah.
We've had good ones, and then we've had some that, like you said, didn't even know your name hardly.
Right.
And they didn't want to know your name.
No. And so I think what Jesus is asking the disciples to do and is asking us to do today, what does servant leadership look like? Because it's more valuable now than it ever has been.
Definitely.
You know, and so how do we do that in our daily life? How do we do this servant leadership?
And why do some people do it so much better than others? Why are some
'Cause they
people
care.
better servant leaders?
Mhm.
And they can see what their servants need.
Well, it comes back down to, so if we're following the philosophy of Jesus, who's your main concern?
The poor
Just other people.
people.
Your
Just other people. So your concern is other people. It's not like you're not putting yourself down. What you're doing is you're putting other people before you. And again, I think a lot of people sort of, when they think of the Christian, you know, sort of ethic and stuff like that, they think, well, I can't love myself. No, you can love yourself. What we do is we just want you to love yourself less than other people. So you put other people in front of you, and it's hard putting other people in front of you. You know, if when you're making an announcement, or something like that, and you're like, well, wait a minute, if I say this, how do I make sure that everybody understands what it is? It takes extra effort, and people don't want to take that extra effort, because when you do servant leadership, you actually have to take into account people's feelings. With servant leadership, you see something that, as you're communicating something, and you slip up, you might have to apologize for that. You might have to take the blame for something. Oh yeah, I when we're doing this rollout, we totally spaced about, that was my fault. I need to take the blame for that. People don't want to take the blame for stuff anymore.
Because
People are-
nobody's ever wrong anymore.
Right.
Excuse me.
So, yeah, exactly. And so, so servant leadership is asking you to look at the world differently, because you're going to get dinged a lot more as a servant leader. Things are going to move slower as a servant leader. It's a lot easier if I just threaten everybody and say, if you don't do this, you're fired, or you're banished from the group, or it's a lot easier for me to say that, because then I don't have to worry about it. Then everything's on
You
you.
don't have to deal with it.
I don't have to deal with it.
Yeah.
But as a servant leader, I said, okay, so let's talk about it. Let's figure out a way to do it better. Or did I not communicate this well? I apologize for not communicating it well. How can I communicate that better? It's going to take me probably 4 to 5 times longer to get the same stuff done. But then the people I'm working with, too, are going to be in a lot better emotional state. Because then you see ourselves as we coming together and working together versus, because like I said, I could tell you the big difference between Woodwinds when we started and Woodwinds when I left. And it was that, that sense of we were working together as a team to make Woodwinds better. I had technologists from CT, if I needed help, they would run and get my patients for me. Or if my boss saw that we were running behind, what can I do for you? Out there talking to the patients and stuff like that. That was when we first started. When we got done to the end, you were on your own. Good luck. Boss would just come in, why are you not getting done that? You're running behind. Da, da, da. They would come in and yell at us in the middle of us doing our patients because we're not moving fast enough, as opposed to going out and talking to the one that's out there saying, hey, they're running a little late, because they have an ER case.
And that's all people want is an explanation.
Right,
Yes.
Exactly. Exactly.
To be acknowledged that, I see that you're here and and we're sorry, but that,
This is what happened.
This is what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, that takes extra effort. It takes extra effort on your part. It's going to take extra time. So the two things that people don't like about servant leadership, your time and your effort. Because when you do servant leadership, you actually have to show other people that you mean it. You can't just fake it. Because when you do servant leadership, you care about people. And so, which is something that this world desperately needs. We need to care about each other.
Yes.
Just think from a leadership standpoint. Like I said, just think of all the positions that you used to do and stuff like that. What would it look like if you had people who were servant leaders there? How different that would have been. And then how do we do that? I think that's the next part. That's what Jesus wants us to do. So what's that servant leadership look like in our lives? You might not run $1 million corporation, but what if you're head of your household? What if you are head of a committee at church, or a member on the committee at church? Or what if you, just name sort of what sort of organization you work with, or friend group that you have, and if you are servant leader within that, what would that look like? And I think that's what Jesus is challenging us to say. This is what you can. This is what stuff can look like. You have to put in the effort. You have to put in the effort. You got to be intentional. If you're not like that, then it ain't going to happen. So, and to bring that point home, because the disciples are still worried about, hey, I'm going to be able to tell the rest of you 10 disciples what you need to do, where you need to go. I need to be in the front of the line with Jesus. You peasants can be behind me. You have this story about a blind man. So there's some stuff interesting about the blind man. So the blind man is on the side of the road. So the interesting thing about that is you sort of have the power dynamics. So you have Jesus and his band of merry followers following him. And they're together, right? They're the insiders. They know everything. They know Jesus. Jesus knows everything as well. And you have someone from the outside who recognizes who Jesus is. Jesus, you are the Messiah, you son of David. Help me. Have mercy on me. And what do the insiders say to that outside voice? Shut up. Right? Don't bother him. Shut up. He's on our side. We do not need you. Yeah. So,
Well, he's on his way to the crucifixion.
yeah.
And if the disciples are finally getting that,
We
I
need to get,
still don't
bother
think they
him.
do.
Right.
He's got bigger things on his mind.
he's got bigger things on his mind. Yeah. So again, the outsider calling out Jesus. Hey, I need Jesus. I need Jesus right now. Insiders, you don't need Jesus. Jesus is doing just fine. Jesus is on a very important mission. You can't bother Jesus right now. And then finally, Jesus is like, no. Have him come here. And so, how excited is the blind man to come over to see Jesus?
He jumps
Yeah,
up.
through his
Right.
rope and everything.
So,
Sprang up.
so the thing that we don't get with that, he's blind. He just threw his cloak off. He has no idea where his cloak is at. He gave up everything. If we want to talk about, last week we talked about the rich man not wanting to give up anything. The man today gave up everything because he would not be able to get that cloak back because he can't see the cloak. He sprang up and let it fall, and he followed Jesus. And it's always interesting, and Jesus did this before. Jesus asked him, as he asked each one of us, what do you want me to do for you? You ever notice that with Jesus? You always think it's bad when I always answer your question with another question.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. He's always asking us. He's not telling us what we need. Again, a servant leader. He's modeling the servant leader.
Because he already knows. He wants that person to say it.
Right. Well, but he knows it, but I think it's also for the imperative for the person to figure out what they really need. What do you need?
It also shows whether we're in tune with the will of God.
Right.
What do you want? Okay, if I want what really is in God's will, it's going to be done. If it's not, I
Absolutely.
don't need a Porsche or Lamborghini. You better not be asking for one.
Exactly. And so he asked the man, and this is my teacher, let me see again. Jesus says to him, go, your faith has made you well. I mean, the other thing with this particular miracle is it's not really extrapolated on. There's not a lot of, it's just Jesus saying, yep, you're good.
Yeah, he doesn't even touch him.
No. So,
The people that he does touch are the unclean people.
there you go.
To prove a point.
Yeah. So like I said, and again, the guy regains his sight and follows Jesus. And so again, it shows you. So we were having fun yesterday at the Pastor Bible study. So this is your visual aid, pun intended, about how servant leadership is supposed to work. What does discipleship look like? So yeah. So that's.
I was thinking he healed a blind man because the disciples are still kind of blind
Yeah.
about what's going to happen.
That's a good one too. Yeah.
Good point.
Good point. So this is Mark's visual aid again for them to say, hey, this is somebody who's outside your group. They knows who Jesus is. And they're able to do that and see Jesus for who Jesus truly was. And you insiders, you don't have a clue what you're doing. You need to have more of an outside view. So I think that's sort of Mark's critique always on the disciples, is they always felt that they knew too much, or they thought they knew more than they did. So, but any other particular questions about?
I have one. Back to the idea of being servant of all, or being humble. Is this the first time Jesus talks to his disciples about that?
About
I
what-
don't remember him saying that particular idea to the disciples before.
the servant leadership?
Yeah. It definitely comes up later after the foot washing.
Right. Yeah, I don't remember in any of the other instances.
Well, he does, like verse 31 is one of the 2 times that I recall when he says the first will be last, the last first.
Right.
That's in that same tone.
It is in that same type of
It's
tone.
just not as,
Maybe not as overt. So, but I mean, he's always modeled that sort of behavior as well too, because he's always listening. For being the Son of God, Jesus was really different than what a God was supposed to be like, because a God was supposed to take charge, tell people what to do, tell people what they wanted, and Jesus was the exact opposite of that. Jesus was always asking, "What do you want?" Which is an interesting question for somebody who's, as powerful as he is. He's never assuming what people want. He's always asking them what they want.
So in my Bible, verse 42, Jesus called to him and said to them, "You know that those who are supposed to rule over the Gentiles lord it over them."
Mhm.
What does that mean?
So it basically is like, so if you have somebody who is your head CEO, they always let everybody know that they're the head CEO, that they get on the elevator first, that you need to do what they want you to do. So a lot of times for Gentiles, which are basically non-Christians, or non-Jewish, sorry, is that the way that, and this is not untrue, but some leaders basically, since I'm the leader, I get all these perks. I get the parking spot right next in front of the church. I get to have all my paraments washed once a week, or whatever they could do. They see themselves as
First in line, whatever.
right. You have some pastors who see themselves as above their congregation, that they have more authority, or that everybody needs to listen to what they say. I've known many pastors like that. It's my way or the highway type of pastor, or any type of leader if you want to do it that particular way. And so yeah, that's what they're.
That's what it means.
That's
when
what
it
he means.
says
Yeah.
Lord. Okay.
So, but any other questions about the text? So I think the big question for us, and we talked about this at council last night, is how do we have that servant leadership as a church? So what are those? One of the commentaries I had that I didn't read last night at the council meeting was, who are those people on the sidelines who are outside of the church screaming for Jesus that we are not listening to, that we're saying, hush now, you don't need Jesus right now. Jesus is busy right now. We got Jesus here. If you really want to talk to him, you need to wait. But what is that in our community right now? Who is screaming for Jesus right now and that we're not paying attention to? How can we be a servant leader within this community? And what would that look like? Is that doing what we have been doing? I would argue we need to start changing our mindset and what do we need to do. We'll have some ideas on Sunday that we'll kick around, but I also want you to start thinking of ideas. What would it mean? And think big. Don't just think, well, it's going to cost a lot of money. I don't care how much it's going to cost. I mean, if we do it, if we need to do it, if that's what we as a church need to do. So I will prime the pump a little bit. We did talk about maybe starting a daycare, because that's really desperately needed within the community, affordable daycare. We talked about maybe having a free clinic. So having healthcare professionals donate their time to come in and have a free clinic once a month, for maybe dental, the whole 9 yards, do mental health counselors as well too. I mean, that might be something we want to do. What other type of stuff? Do we make some of our land and turn it into another care center for folks, or low income housing? I mean, there's a lot of different things we can do. So, but what do we as a congregation, again, that's that servant leadership. I could dictate exactly what we're going to do. And that's exactly wrong.
Yeah.
Because it's
you're
not,
not going to get helpers that way.
well, that, and it's not that Jesus is talking about that servant leadership. How do we come together? It's going to take longer to do, which is why we're doing a 5-year plan. And there's going to be starts and stops along the way. But by doing that, it's going to be that much more impactful on people, because people are going to feel wanted and needed and feel good about the process.
Yeah, part of it. And ownership.
And ownership, yeah, exactly. So I want you to think about that. So we'll have that on Sunday. Or if you have any other great ideas, let me know. Because like I said, again, and don't think they're silly. Let's ask other people, because the idea you give me might be the idea that we land on. It's like we have a ton of different ideas. We're going to start looking at the top 3 that we get and say, okay, so what can we do just to look into them and say, okay, yeah, maybe we'll find out that the daycare will cost us $500,000. Well, okay, that's probably not feasible for us to do. Or we find out that having all the healthcare professionals is going to cost us like $10,000 a month. Well, again, we could find a grant, or we need to look at these things. What we can and can't do, and maybe it's a hybrid at a certain point. We start doing one thing and it sort of morphs into something else. That's sort of how the Spirit works. So think about it. Let me know. We'll talk about it a little bit more on Sunday for the sermon, because I think it really gets at the heart of that servant leadership. Because I think a lot of us churches especially have forgotten to be servant leaders in our community. We expect to be the experts, and sometimes with churches it's our way or no way, which doesn't always help people who are coming into the church. There's that great expression, but we've always done it that way before. It doesn't always serve us well. So, any other questions, concerns? All right. Well, let me hit stop on this guy.